Hey guys, this is the lecture and directions for the 10-14 Mesopotamia notes. So I am currently in the week 9 module by clicking enter here. And as you can see, there are a set of directions on the screen. First, we're going to open up the note-taking document, which is linked in blue here. And we are going to make a copy, change the name of the assignment to reflect our first and last name. And then we're going to drop it into our Unit 3 Social Studies folder by clicking the folder, click My Drive, the arrow over. I'll find my 2021 Social Studies folder, and then I will click on the Unit 3 Mesopotamia folder. We're going to hit OK, and this will make you a copy of the notes. After you make that copy, we can close out the other version. So what you see in front of you now is the note-taking sheet that we're going to be using for today's lecture about Mesopotamia. You can see that there are a few different places that you have to answer questions. Over on the left-hand side, you'll be answering questions, but also you'll be filling in the blanks. To fill in the blanks, you need to make sure that you can delete the lines. So you wouldn't fill in the blank until the line is deleted. Let's go back. We're also going to use the presentation that is linked here in orange. This is not something you need to make a copy of. This is something that I am going to give the lecture on, and you are welcome to follow along with the video lecture and pause where needed to make your notes. Let's go ahead and get started. So Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. What is a civilization? And how is the location of a civilization determined? Well, the location of all civilizations is determined by the resources of the land. So people are only going to live where they can find the proper resources in order to survive. As we saw in our previous unit, all resources that you need to be within a certain distance of where you live. Otherwise, you will have to default back to being a hunter-gatherer. And so the civilization, again, is determined by the resources of the land. Without resources, you cannot have a permanent settlement. Finding the perfect location. Well, early humans were traveling the world to find the best location to settle permanently. So as they were being hunter-gatherers, they slowly start to find places that work for them until they find the perfect location. These early settlers found a place in a region called the Fertile Crescent, and now Mesopotamia is known as the land between two rivers. It was the perfect location because it offered rich, fertile land that was perfect for farming. Where do we think that this fertile land came from? These people migrated out of Africa and usually are crossing through very barren and deserted areas. So they just all of a sudden find fertile land. Where does it come from? And think about it. How does farming create permanent settlement? Why do we think Mesopotamia was the perfect location? Geography of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is located in Iraq. This is in the current day Middle East, so settled in between Africa, Europe, and Asia. Some of the major physical features of Mesopotamia are the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Those are the two rivers that make up the land between the rivers. So it is bordered on two sides by those rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates. We also hear the term Fertile Crescent, which is the area in between. So we would have to make the assumption that the land in between the two rivers is fertile. And then also the Persian Gulf, which is a body of water down here at the bottom of Mesopotamia. So again, Mesopotamia civilization is part of a region called the Fertile Crescent, and the civilization was built along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And these two rivers were the key to life and success. So I think it's pretty obvious what the answer is for what were the two most important physical features. The beginning of agriculture. The rivers flowed from the mountains down to the Persian Gulf because rivers flow from very high elevation to low elevation, and elevation is just how high something is. So really, rivers flow from high ground to low ground. So they flow from the mountains, which are the high ground, all the way to the Persian Gulf, which is at sea level. So that is the lowest level. And early farmers or early settlers farmed the land and used the resources from the land to help improve their life. They were able to get timber from the mountains, and this is used to help them make boats. They were also able to find metal and stone to make tools. And so cities start to develop along the rivers. And this is a really important thing to note is that cities develop along the rivers because rivers have so many resources that you might not even think about, which we'll get into in a little bit. So what early settlers did is that they had to irrigate the land along the banks of the river in order for their crops to grow. And remember, irrigate means to control the water of the rivers. So what they would do is from the river, you can see here in the picture, they would dig ditches or canals, and that would channel the water or bring the water when it flooded to where they needed to go. So they would dig a ditch from the river to their farmland. And when the river flooded, it would flood the ditches and it would bring the really awesome water and the very fertile dirt called silt to the crops when they needed it. And this is what the farmers did in order to farm in the region. They had to irrigate, creating order. Due to the population rising in Mesopotamia, it was important to create order. That is the purpose of government, my loves, is to maintain order and to keep people safe. The first system used to create order was called division of labor. And this just means that every person in the civilization had a different job to create a successful and well-rounded civilization. But as civilizations start to grow larger and have more people, we need a more complex system of government in order to keep people safe. The second system that was used to create order is called a social hierarchy. And what that is that every person was ranked into a class. The class of a family is determined by the job that you had in the civilization. And based on the job you had, determined how much money that you could have had and how much power you had. The jobs that were hard labor are always at the bottom of the social pyramid. So if you look over here, it shows you that the slaves and the farmers are at the bottom, but they're also the biggest classes, whereas the people who make decisions are the highest class are at the top, and it's the smallest class. So then independent empires made the large area of Mesopotamia easier to control. So Mesopotamia starts to break into various different empires which controlled their small little areas. And then each empire had their own laws, army, government, and leaders. And because they often got competitive with each other for control over the land, this just means that their government had to be even stronger, but that they created military. And by creating all of these new things because of the competition, they in effect cause and create new jobs. So this is easy to answer. What are the two systems that created order in Mesopotamia? So make sure we are answering that question. The first empire. So the people who lived in Sumer were called Sumerians. Sumer is the first empire of Mesopotamia. And this existed from 3000 to 1800 BCE. BCE stands for before the Common Era, or you might have seen it as BC, before Christ. We use BCE, before the Common Era, to get rid of that religious aspect. So think of this as negative numbers on a timeline. The numbers go to from the highest number to the lowest number, ending at the -1, just like on a number line before we start counting up. And instead of having a positive or a negative on a number line, we use BCE to show negative and AD or CE to show positive. And this is just a way that we measure time. The Empire of Sumer had many cities, and they shared the same culture and traded with one another. So cities and empires are very different. Empires are made up of various cities, whereas cities are small little areas that people communicate and work together in. Whereas empires, they compete against each other. Some of the things that Sumer is known for, some of the inventions, was that they were a very agricultural society. Because they were so agricultural and could farm so well, they created a surplus of food. Surplus just means an excess or extra. And if you have extra, you're able to put it into storage and use it when you need it so that you are not constantly farming. So this creates a whole other system of jobs for people to have. Sumer also had the wheel. This is extremely important because they are able to use the plow for farming and carts for trading. And it was really important to be able to trade between cities, but also they do begin to trade between empires. And the last invention that is probably the most important is called cuneiform, and that is pronounced cuneiform. This is the very first writing system ever. So remember that prehistory is the time before written records. Cuneiform is when we start to move over into that modern day history, you would so call it, because they had developed a system of writing to start to keep records. And the reason that they need to keep records is because their civilizations are growing so large that they need to keep track of who owns what and how much food each person was responsible for creating. So again, these are the three inventions that Sumer is known for: agricultural society, the wheel, and cuneiform. The Second Empire. The people who lived in Babylon were called Babylonians. So Babylon is the second empire in Mesopotamia. So we start with Sumer, and now we're moving to Babylon. Babylon existed from 1800 to 1200 BCE. Again, we're going to think negative numbers. This is the time before the modern era. Some of the inventions that Babylonia is known for are the calendar. And this is extremely important because they used this to know when the rivers would flood. This is how they got such rich farmland and were able to farm so many crops, because the rivers would flood pretty regularly. And when they flooded, they would bring the dirt from the bottom of the river, and that dirt is called silt. Silt is extremely, extremely fertile soil. And so they would dig the irrigation ditches, and that would push the water and the silt to the crops. And that silt, after the water would settle down into the dirt, would cover the crops, making it extremely fertile. And so they were able to grow bigger and more crops. And so they use their calendar to track to know when the rivers are going to flood, because it's extremely important so that they can and plan their crops and their lifestyle around that. So that's a really big deal considering they are now using something to measure time, whereas shortly before this, there is no way to measure time and we don't even have written records. The other thing that Babylonia was known for is law. A man named King Hammurabi created these clear rules and clear punishments. And he thought that laws were given to Hammurabi by the gods. And this kept people from rebelling. So this again is a very early form of government, but the fact that they put laws in place to control the people and to help the people is pretty astounding. The Third Empire. The people who lived in this Third Empire in Assyria were called Assyrians, and this existed from 1200 through 539 BCE. Think again, negative numbers. The Empire of Assyria were very fierce warriors with many war strategies. So this is a very army and military based society, and so we have to assume that they are out for blood, so to say. They want to conquer all of their surrounding areas. And so they conquer Babylonia and they take control of a large part of Mesopotamia. So this means that they are very much stronger and probably more in sync with each other than the other two empires. Some of the inventions that Assyria is known for were trade. So they used boats to trade goods, which was very different, which is also a benefit to being on a river. But they also have very different war tactics because they trained to take over other areas, even if they had walls to protect them. And so they had to come up with extremely detailed plans in order to do this and to be very coordinated, making war one of the inventions that they are known for because they changed the way that people are fighting. Religion in Mesopotamia. The people in Mesopotamia were polytheistic. Polytheistic means many gods. Poly meaning many, so think of like polygon in math, meaning many sides of a shape, and theistic usually has to do with religion. So they were polytheistic, meaning that they usually worshipped multiple gods and goddesses. And these gods and goddesses centered around usually the land, the crops, and protection. Each empire had something called a ziggurat in the center of their land. Think of this as like a modern day church or synagogue or mosque. And it's used for many reasons. So they use it for religious ceremonies mainly. But these early religious centers start to also be used for like schools and other official meetings for kings. So these ziggurats had many purposes. So they're used for religious ceremonies, they're used as a school to teach cuneiform writing, and they're also used for the kings to have official meetings. Each of the empires was connected by their religion because it was thought that a god or goddess was assigned an empire to protect. So the gods and goddesses were important because they dealt with nature and daily life. And this is what the people of Mesopotamia thought made their life what it was. So they worshiped these gods to help bring them a more successful life, making this why the gods were and goddesses were important. So map reading. So on the screen before you, there is a map. On the map, we see various features. We can see that Mesopotamia is the area that is shaded in this purpley color. And from here, we also see the area around it being deserts, and there are some mountains up here on the top. We can see that the Mediterranean Sea is up in the northwest corner, and the Persian Gulf is down here at the bottom. And we do see that there are the two rivers, the Euphrates River, ending in the Persian Gulf, and the Tigris River, ending in the Persian Gulf. And we can see the various different empires listed here in Mesopotamia. So you're going to answer some questions based on what you see on the map. And remember, guys, north is up, east is to the right, south is to the bottom, and west is to the left. So the questions you're going to be answering are, what two rivers run through the Fertile Crescent? What body of water do the rivers flow into? Because remember, rivers flow from usually mountainous areas in the middle of land to the lowest elevation or the lowest level, which is sea level. So they flow into a bigger body of water. What sea is located to the west of the rivers? And what is the area called that is shown by the pink color, meaning the purple color? So in conclusion, my loves, we have now learned about the basics of Mesopotamia and what made Mesopotamia so special as the first civilization.